Hi, my name is Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Govern. Thank you for watching. What happens when you discover that Washington's politicians and legislators aren't working for you, and what can you do about it? So today we're reporting from Washington State, specifically the City of Olympia, which is home to many homeless camps as well as the state capitol. This is where the seat of government is located, most of the bureaucracy, the governor, and the legislature. And since it is earlier in the year, the legislature is in session. There are two types of sessions that the legislature has in Washington. One's called the long session on odd years, and then the other is the short session on even-numbered years. Since it's 2020, we're in the middle of a short session. The reason why they have short sessions on even-numbered years is so that the legislators can get home and campaign for office. Now, I always say that anytime the legislature's in session, you're at risk, you're in danger. And the reason why I say that is because whenever the legislature's in session, your money is never safe. They are always trying to find ways to increase taxes, fees, try to find ways to take more of your money because, of course, they know how to spend your money better than you do. Also, your freedoms are never safe. Your freedoms are never safe because it is the nature of bureaucracy to perpetuate itself, and politicians like to support the bureaucracy. And government only expands at the expense of your freedoms. And so they are always trying to push for more legislation, more ways of expanding bureaucracy and taking away more of your freedoms. And unfortunately, since it is a state capital, there are a lot of politicians and special interests who are working very diligently to try to find ways to take both your money and your freedoms from you. And let's talk about a couple of specific examples. We'll start with our illustrious Governor Inslee. Now, Governor Inslee is not a legislator. In fact, he wanted to be president, but he failed in that effort, wasn't even able to muster 1% of any poll in America. And so Americans being more wise, apparently, than Washingtonians, he has now come back to run for a third term, a consolation prize, as governor of Washington State. However, as he proved when he was on the campaign trail for president, he really wants to be the green guy, the green governor, any way he can. One of the things he wants to do is to be the climate emergency king and be able to declare martial law anytime that he claims that there's a climate emergency in Washington State. Now, he's not a legislator, he's a governor. His only role in legislation, theoretically, is just to sign that bill or maybe veto it. But in this case, he does like to get engaged and involved early in the process, and the Democrats unfortunately control both the House and the Senate, and they usually cooperate with the governor and try to give him what he wants. And in his effort to be the green czar and the green governor, this is just one example of a bill that he's pushing, and it's not a good one. Another example would be from his sidekick, Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Now, Bob Ferguson was a former King County Council member, and so he's used to writing laws or being involved in that process. And although he's Attorney General now, he has also started to exercise his position in that office to push for a lot of legislation that he wants. Specifically, lately, it's just been primarily targeting anybody who owns a gun. Certainly, Ferguson wants to take away your guns. He wants to make it much more difficult for you to defend yourself. He's going to push many, many different pieces of legislation. He already did this with Initiative 1639, which he cooperated with several billionaires to push in 2018, and now he had a whole slew of new bills. And although the legislature, dutifully, these Democrats proposed these bills on Ferguson's behalf, this is something that seems to be a big push for him. Now, when it comes to just run-of-the-mill legislators, one of the examples I like to use right now is two of our senators, Senator Hunt and Cooterer, who are pushing a bill right now that basically denies voters the right to have advisory votes. Now, Washington State started having advisory votes on tax increases. This came about as a citizens' initiative, again, not initiated by legislators. It was a citizens' initiative that would allow the voters to be able to have input and to tell the legislature whether they liked or didn't like the tax increase that the legislature proposed that year. And they weren't binding, but at least it allowed citizens to kind of give a report card on how well their representatives were doing for them. Now, if there's one thing that legislators don't like, it's when the voters tell them whether they like what they did or not, especially since most of the time the voters in Washington State have not appreciated the many tax increases that the legislature has imposed on them. And since last year, in 2019, the legislature was dominated by Democrats in both the House and Senate. Many tax increases were shoved through, and the voters, for the most part, rejected most of these. So, of course, in response, the senators, Senator Hunt and Senator Cooterer in particular, are pushing successfully so far a bill through the legislature that would make it illegal for voters to have the right to have advisory votes. So this is an example, I believe, one of many, of how you're not safe and how there are a lot of problems with what the legislature wants to do. But the good news is the legislature is halfway through. And what that means is that as we go further along the legislative process, there are deadlines and cutoffs that pop up, and these basically stop bills from advancing any further. There's been approximately about 1,700 bills that were proposed in the legislature just this 2020 session. There's also several thousand that kind of roll over from the 2019 session. And most of them are going to die early on in the process because they won't get a committee hearing or they won't go to rules. And so that's a good thing for the most part. Now, unfortunately, a lot of good bills die, but that is a good thing generally because most of the bills that have a chance of passing and getting signed by this governor are not very good. So specifically, let's talk about some of these bills that died. One of them I've spoken about before in previous videos, which is the ghost bill, stopping the ghost bills. This was proposed by Representative Walsh in the 19th Leg District, and this was a great piece of legislation because it was going to prevent the legislature from pushing through these what they call title-only bills or secretive bills that don't have any content in them, just simply a blank title, so that they can save them up to the very end, and then usually they shove a tax increase in them. Now, this bill didn't go anywhere because, of course, that's exactly what the Democrats plan on doing in both the House and Senate, is to shove through those taxes at the last minute under bills that we don't even know what they're going to be. They're just a ghost bill, a title-only bill. Nobody knows what it is. Hopefully, this will be able to come back in a future session and we'll be able to actually get some movement on this policy. It was a good bill, and hopefully we see it come back again. Then there's some of the bad bills that have died as well. For instance, the assault weapons ban or the semi-automatic rifle ban. This was one of Ferguson's marquee bills that he was really hoping to push forward. That one has died for now. I'm sure they'll try to revive it again in the future, and he has plenty of anti-gun bills on the agenda, but that one has died. Another ridiculous bill that had been proposed in the legislature was to ban plastic straws. Virtue signaling, fairly useless, but the kind of stuff that Olympia likes to do quite often. That bill has died. There are bills that are still alive, however, showing the legislative priorities in Washington and some of the important things that every voter in Washington state should care about. For instance, establishing the Sushiasaurus rex as Washington state's dinosaur. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing. The only dinosaur that's ever been discovered in Washington state. On Susha Island in the San Juans, they discovered some bones in 2012, and some students actually from Parkland High School, I believe it was, they proposed this bill, and they're going to make this the dinosaur for Washington state. Now, the Sushiasaurus, or as my kids pronounce it, the Suckosaurus, is going to be Washington state's newest dinosaur, and that bill is flying through the legislative process. Another one is the establishing Washington state's moss piglet as the micro animal of Washington state. These are high priorities for the legislature. They're very important, and these are the types of bills that sail through without any problem. So these bills are still alive, they're still moving forward, and all the accountability and transparency bills, those bills got killed, but these bills are moving forward. Now, in the end, what Washington state is about is money. It's about increasing how much money the legislature can raise and finding ways of getting more tax dollars and getting more of your tax dollars any way they possibly can. Oftentimes, all this other legislation is sort of a distraction as they get to the main game. They're spending the first 45 days of the legislative session negotiating with special interests, behind the scenes, usually excluding the Republicans in this case, trying to find ways of increasing these taxes. And that's the big game in Olympia. That's the big game when the legislature's in session. How much money can they take from you? These are the bills, we don't even know what they are yet. Now, we know there'll probably be something like gas taxes or carbon taxes or other types of taxes, but they are pushing these, and this is where the real negotiations are going on behind the scenes. And particularly, they want to do this without you even being aware. And that's why they pass these bills oftentimes in the dead of night. They're very quiet about it. They want to try to do this in a way that the average person who's busy with their day-to-day lives, that you're not even aware that they just did it. Kind of quietly take that money from you. And you only realize it when you get your property tax bill or something else happens in the future and you wonder, why do I have far less money to spend now? And one reason is because the legislature usually tries to find a way to take more because of course they know how to spend your money better than you do. Nowhere is this more evident, actually, in the recent $13 car tabs, $9.76, the third time Washington state voters, when given the choice, despite massive millions of dollars spent against it, have passed. Now, for the third time in Washington state, the $30 car tabs. This is the initiative, all three times that was been sponsored by Tim Eyman, that actually brings down the car tabs for every vehicle in Washington state to $30. Now, the legislature has always hated it when citizens get involved in trying to reduce their taxes. There's nothing that they hate more than that, and they will do anything they can to stop it. Right now, the $30 car tabs that was passed by 53% of the voters here just a few months ago in November is currently being challenged in court. So the legislators are sort of able to hide behind the court system. But the reality is the Republicans had actually proposed a variety of fixes that would implement $30 car tabs today, that would eliminate any objections from a legal standpoint as to how this can be implemented. But of course, those have been killed, and the legislature, dominated by the Democrats in both houses, and the governor have tried to find any and every way they can to ensure they collect maximum amount of dollars on car tabs, just like they want to take the maximum amount of dollars anywhere else. So this is an ongoing issue. It's in the courts now, but it's a big deal, and people are pretty frustrated about it. The average people in Washington state are very frustrated about the homeless camps. They're proliferating not only in Olympia, but in Seattle, they're in Vancouver, they're in Everett, they're in Bellingham, they're in Spokane. And it's become very absurd. I mean, there's a real quality of life problem here with drug addicts being able to dump garbage into salmon streams, to throw their needles wherever they want, to set up their camps wherever they want. The same people who are requiring the Department of Ecology and other local planning departments to harass you, saying that you need to have your home set 200 feet back from a stream, or that you need all these other permits and requirements, they look the other way. They don't even bother to try to enforce any kind of rules or regulations on these homeless camps, which are proliferating everywhere. And this has become a real sore spot for average people in Washington state. The legislature, unless it has to do with increasing your taxes, they're not really going to solve this problem. Which is why you have to get involved. The future does belong to those who show up. We have to be engaged and involved in government. I'm hearing from a lot of people who are down Olympia, who work in Olympia, and they're telling me that the large number of people who are calling and emailing and showing up to talk to their legislators, even those who are hostile to them, even the Democrats who love taxes, sometimes even they'll listen a little bit. And they are making a difference. Some bad bills are being killed, and I think that partially this is because people are showing up and making an impact. But the thing to remember is that a lot of people who you may believe you disagree with politically today, a lot of them are being impacted by the same issues that are impacting you. They're being impacted by these homeless camps. They're being impacted by these ridiculous taxes, a bloated and incompetent government, and they're starting to walk away from the Democrat Party or from some of those beliefs, and they're starting to cross over and say, listen, I just want government to get out of my life. I want them to leave me alone. And I think you have to be open to bringing people like this in and expanding the number of people in our state who are feeling the same way you probably are about how government's going and how to make it different and better. And ultimately, that means that you have to be involved in the election process. Elections are coming up in 2020. Governor Inslee, for his third consolation time, he's up for election again. You have Bob Ferguson, our AG. As terrible as he is, he's going to be on the ballot again. You have an opportunity to vote for him. You have an opportunity to vote for all the legislators and half the state senators. And it does matter. Showing up and voting does matter. And that's something that people have to remember. Don't get discouraged. It may be disgusting, it may be terrible what you see the legislators doing at times, or your local government doing, but you can't just go home and sit down in front of the TV and expect it to get better. You have to be engaged, you have to be involved. And ultimately, I think that's what matters the most. Whether it's in Olympia, whether it's at home, whether it's at City Hall, whether it's the school board, whatever it is, it requires us to engage, to point out the absurdities that are happening, to be involved with other people, to get together with like-minded folk and to push back, because even in Olympia, even in our state capital, you can make a difference, but you do have to show up. Thank you for watching. To learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Do you think there's a bill that's even worse that's been proposed in Olympia? Please let me know in the comments section below. And remember, the future belongs to those who show up. Until next time.